Marvel and DC have been rivals for decades, and while one company has been above the other in the past, DC has been above Marvel like in the 90s for instance. Now Marvel is definitely a more successful franchise because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is the biggest movie franchise of all time, and it pioneered the concept of the cinematic universe, which no other cinematic universe has really accomplished, which no other cinematic universe has gotten close to being as good as Marvel's. The DCEU has tried, but the structure of its universe is a lot messier, and while 2022 might very well be the best year for the DCU ever, they're releasing like 4 movies and a TV show. So far, it started pretty good with Peacemaker. That doesn't change the fact that for the longest time, Marvel definitely had a head start and a much better structure to their universe, making Marvel more successful than DC, at least right now. A while back I made a video where I restructured the DCU to fit the MCU structure to see what that would look like and if the DCU could pull that off, and now I want to do the opposite, restructuring the MCU into the DCU's messier structure. This will include every movie plus TV show, which is really just Peacemaker, that came out between 2013 with Man of Steel and that will come out next year, which is what's confirmed, up to Blue Beetle, which is coming out next year. So there are a couple movies that actually haven't come out yet, but I will include them in this video because we know basically what they're going to be about, and I have an idea of what the MCU equivalent would have been. So with that in mind, let's begin with Man of Steel's equivalent, which I'm making Captain America. We could call it the first Avenger, but I would just call it Captain America. This would be an origin story for Captain America. The reason I chose Captain America here instead of like Wonder Woman or something else is because the next movie, which is Civil War, would be a fight between Captain America and Iron Man is the character who fits the bill the most for Batman, at least in that movie. So Iron Man is going to be Batman, not for the entire cinematic universe, he won't be the equivalent for Batman the entire time, but for the next movie and the Avengers movies he will. Meanwhile, Captain America is the equivalent to Superman. So the first movie is Captain America. It could take place in the 40s, it could take place in the present day, it doesn't really matter. The changes don't really have to be like anything, it could be really the exact same movie, maybe a bit darker because Man of Steel is a bit of a darker movie. The next movie in the DCEU is Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, with its MCU equivalent being Captain America v Iron Man Civil War, which is a bit different from the MCU's version of Civil War because this is the first time Captain America and Iron Man are meeting. The other Avengers aren't included, it's just them two, plus also Thor, who's going to be the Wonder Woman equivalent in this cinematic universe. Iron Man in this universe has been Iron Man for 20 years prior to this movie, so he became Iron Man in 1996. And obviously, like I said, this is the first time they meet. The main villain, which is the Lex Luthor equivalent, is Baron Zemo, just like the regular Civil War movie. He is the one who manipulates the two heroes into fighting, but also creates a abomination monster, which is the Abomination, the equivalent to Doomsday, that Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor all fight as like the first time the Trinity are together. And of course, Captain America also dies in this movie, which inspires Iron Man to form the Avengers, and Captain America also comes back in the Avengers movie, which I'm not really going to talk about beyond this because it's pretty obvious. Anyway, also, the Hulk isn't really in the cinematic universe. The Avengers team itself is different to better fit the DC structure and roster of the Justice League, but the Hulk, all he's really going to have is a small cameo in a single movie, and we'll get to that when we get to that, but it's really not significant. There are a lot of DC characters that aren't really included in the DCEU, and the Hulk is a casualty of that restructuring here. So the next movie is Suicide Squad, which the counterpart would have been Guardians of the Galaxy because that is like the secondary non-Avengers team. It was the counterpart in the last video, but I don't think it would work for the DCEU structure because the Suicide Squad movies each have a spin-off. There's the Harley Quinn movie / Birds of Prey, and there's Peacemaker, both of which, if this was Guardians of the Galaxy, would have to be Guardians of the Galaxy spin-offs, which I don't really think there are any good ones that I could think of, which is why I'm not making this Guardians of the Galaxy, and this cinematic universe doesn't include the Guardians of the Galaxy at all, which I don't think anybody would have been bothered by had they not been included in the first place because nobody knew who they were. Instead, this cinematic universe has the Thunderbolts, which is Marvel's equivalent to the Suicide Squad, a group of villains that is forced to work for the government to do some good. This would be run by General Ross, but I'll also include Crossbones, which would be like the Deadshot character, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, who would not be on the Avengers in this cinematic universe. Instead, they would be here, and one of them will get a spin-off. One of them will be the Birds of Prey equivalent spin-off from this movie. A couple other characters that could be included. The villain could be Enchantress, which is the villain from Suicide Squad, because Marvel has their own Enchantress, which is the Asgardian who comes to Earth looking for Thor and ends up coming face to face with the Thunderbolts instead. It probably wouldn't be a good movie because Suicide Squad wasn't a good movie, but the second one could be, so the Thunderbolts, which will come later, might be a bit better. Next up is Wonder Woman, with the equivalent being Thor. Thor could be the same movie that just comes out 6 years later. It comes out in 2017. It doesn't really need to be any changes from the original. It could take place in the past, could be a prequel to Civil War where he did appear in. Much like Wonder Woman, the movie itself took place before her appearance in Batman vs. Superman, way before. Jane Foster might die because the love interest in Wonder Woman did die. Those changes don't necessarily need to happen, but if this was to be like a exact copy of the Wonder Woman movie, like with the same beats, that could happen. Jane Foster would then also appear in the second movie through some sort of magical reason, but I don't think it really matters that much for the cinematic universe structure. So then we have the Justice League movie, with the equivalent obviously being the Avengers, and there are a couple things I have to talk about here. The first of which is the roster, which I mentioned earlier, being very different. You do still have Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, but you don't have Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Hulk. Instead, I have Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man, all of whom are important to the cinematic universe, which is why I changed things up. We do still have to have the big three there for like the Civil War, and then like Thor being involved and also having his own franchise. But in the DCEU, it's Aquaman who has a franchise. Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and now Flash is getting a movie. Those characters have franchises, so Thor being around still a lot makes sense. But Captain America and Iron Man would have a much smaller role in this universe than they did in that one, because Superman and Batman don't actually have that big of a role post-Justice League. They're not getting their own movies. Batman is appearing in the Flash movie, and that's it. He's being replaced after that. My point here is that we do need to have the Trinity there. Thor has his own franchise. Batman and Superman's equivalents, Iron Man and Captain America, have very large roles initially, but we also need to have characters who would have their own franchises have very large roles. On the Avengers, because they would have larger roles after that, those characters like Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man, which are like Aquaman and the Flash and the later version of Batman, because Iron Man doesn't really fit the later role that Batman has, while Spider-Man does. So that's the main reason I switched up the founding members of the Avengers for this movie. The second thing that is important about this movie is that it completely failed. It lost a lot of money. People didn't like it. Joss Whedon was doing a good job with the movie, but then he was replaced by Zack Snyder, and the movie ended up being the super long, slow-mo-y, dark version of the Avengers movie that we got in real life, which people just didn't like. And that does mean there will be a Joss Whedon's Avengers later on, so we'll get to that. The next movie is Aquaman in late 2018, which the equivalent would be Black Panther, mostly because the Black Panther movie and the Aquaman movie are very, very similar movies, and they both have this kingdom that is hidden from the world. So Black Panther and Aquaman, I think they make sense as their equivalents. Plus, both movies made $1 billion against all odds, and nobody saw that coming for either of them. This movie's equivalent to Mera would actually be Storm, which brings me to talk about how the MCU here doesn't really have any restrictions. I guess I should have talked about that when I mentioned Spider-Man 2, but the DCU technically doesn't have any restrictions. They own all of their characters, so they can include whoever they want. So the DCEU version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have access to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man. The reason I haven't included almost any of them yet is because the DCU did take a while to include any characters that are not Justice League characters. I included Spider-Man already. Storm is in this movie because why not? She is affiliated with Black Panther heavily. Next up is Shazam, and I had to make the equivalent Captain Marvel. I made the equivalent Doctor Strange in the last video, but that is the equivalent to the Flash movie, and there's an important reason as to why. So I had to make the Captain Marvel movie's equivalent Captain Marvel. The movie would be very similar. The only difference, well actually it's a pretty big difference, is that Captain Marvel hasn't been Captain Marvel for as long as she was in the MCU. It doesn't take place in the 90s either. It's just a movie about Carol Danvers becoming Captain Marvel. It is her origin story in the year 2019. It takes place in the year 2019. She isn't like the first Avenger or anything. The Avenger's name doesn't come from her. She's just like another superhero who gains powers here, but she is one of the more powerful ones, much like Shazam is himself. The next movie is definitely the weirdest movie in this universe. It's had so many titles. It was called Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. The initial title was actually Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. Like I said earlier, Black Widow was in the Thunderbolts movie, and the reason I put her there is because she is a villain in the comics who becomes a hero, so I thought that would be interesting to do that throughout the cinematic universe. So this movie would be a Black Widow movie. It could be called Black Widow. It could be also an A-Force movie, which is like the female team-up like the Birds of Prey for Marvel. It could be called Black Widow A-Force, Black Widow, just A-Force, maybe A-Force and the Wondrous Liberation of the Black Widow. I don't know. The main character would be Black Widow. It would be a Black Widow movie, but it could include a couple other female superheroes who aren't really franchise characters like She-Hulk, Mantis, and Jessica Jones. The story would be similar. After her experience with the Thunderbolts, she becomes free, and Black Widow finds herself leading a group of female heroes like Harley Quinn did in that movie. Next up is Wonder Woman 1984, which is, in my opinion, the worst movie in this cinematic universe. Regardless of that, however, the equivalent would have to be a Thor movie, but I would make it like kind of like a combination of Thor, The Dark World, and Ragnarok. It wouldn't feature Hulk, but it would have like Malekith and Hela. Since Wonder Woman 1984 did have two main villains, this movie can as well. The name of the movie would be Thor Ragnarok, but it would take some inspiration from the real world Thor, The Dark World, as like those two movies would be mushed together a bit. Probably wouldn't end up good, but Wonder Woman 1984 sucks, so that's fine. The fans demanded it for years, and Marvel just caved in eventually with Joss Whedon's The Avengers, which features the same group of characters: Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man. But this time, it's a lot more colorful, a lot more fun, it's shorter, so it's easier to digest. Plus, the Hulk has a cameo, because the Martian Manhunter has a cameo in the Zack Snyder's Justice League. So Hulk has a cameo here. I should have mentioned this earlier too, but like Loki wouldn't be the main villain, it would be Ebony Maw because he's more connected to Thanos, much like Steppenwolf is more connected to Darkseid. But really I just like wanted to do this parallel where in the real DCU, Zack Snyder was the one that people wanted to make the movie and Joss Whedon messed it up. In the MCU it would be the reverse because Joss Whedon was the real life director of the highly successful and beloved Avengers movie from 2012. So I think that it's interesting, that parallel that was created here. So the next movie is The Suicide Squad, which, like I said earlier, the equivalent would be The Thunderbolts. Still just a bad name for a sequel. Most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Anyway, this movie would feature a couple characters returning, like General Ross and Zemo and Black Widow, and that's really it. Zemo also like dies right at the beginning, much like the Suicide Squad brought back just a couple characters from the first movie, but for the most part it wasn't really a sequel, it's more so like its own thing. But this movie would also include like Taskmaster instead of Crossbones, much like how Bloodsport replaced a Deadshot. It could also include US Agent, but also Deadpool, who would be the character to get his own spin-off, much like Peacemaker got not too long after. The overall plot of this movie would be similar to The Suicide Squad, which is just that like General Ross brings together another version of the team, this time to fight like an alien invasion or some sort of alien, or maybe even like extra-dimensional threat. Doesn't really matter who it would be, all that matters is that Deadpool is here and he's getting a spin-off. The Deadpool TV show would debut on Disney Plus in January 2022 and would be like the biggest success of this universe in terms of like how much people like it. It would also have the first and so far only appearance of the Avengers since their movie. Anyway, Deadpool would be a lot like Peacemaker, but like if Vigilante was the main character, because watching Peacemaker, Vigilante really reminded me of Deadpool, so this show could definitely capture the same comedy of Peacemaker along with the action and R-rated violence of Peacemaker, plus also the Deadpool movies themselves. Speaking of those movies, Colossus being a part of Deadpool's like inner circle was, I think, a really good decision that they could carry over into this TV show, because Peacemaker has a best friend of Vigilante, so here Deadpool could have a best friend in Colossus. Right after Peacemaker, the Batman movie comes out. It's actually a week from now, and I know it's not a DCEU movie, but it does feature a character who is also in this universe. So if this was Marvel, then it would also feature a character who is in this universe, but it's not from the same universe. That character, like I said earlier, was Iron Man. Iron Man was the counterpart to Batman in the beginning, But that's quickly switched over to Spider-Man. Spider-Man is now the equivalent to Batman. There is a big reason for that, which I'll get to in the Flash equivalent movie. For now, this Batman movie, is the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movie. It's a Spider-Man movie that isn't connected to the main universe, and it's a separate franchise from the main Spider-Man, which in the MCU is Tom Holland, at least for now. The next movie is going to be Black Adam, which is the first villain movie in this universe, and while it would make sense for this movie to be about a Captain Marvel villain, because Shazam his counterpart is Captain Marvel and Black Adam is a Shazam villain, that doesn't really work, because Captain Marvel, 1, doesn't really have any good villains, especially ones that deserve their own movie, and 2, there's another Marvel villain who really deserves his own movie and is very similar to Black Adam in the fact that he is also the ruler of his own fictional country, and that's Doctor Doom, the ruler of Latveria, the Fantastic Four, but also rest of the Marvel Universe villain. He's a great character who has been criminally underused or poorly used in the movies. And definitely out of all of the Marvel villains, it's like him and Magneto, and I guess Venom, but like Venom after he's already been a Spider-Man villain, could hold their own movies. There's also a pretty good opportunity here because the JSA are included in Black Adam, and there are 4 characters, there are 4 heroes in Black Adam as members of the JSA, so we could just easily make those Fantastic Four. I mean, there's Dr. Fate, Hawkman, Cyclone, and Atom Smasher. That could be just Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, The Thing, and the Human Torch. That being said, though, I think the X-Men are a lot more similar to the JSA. Like, JSA aren't really a family, and they're usually a lot more than just 4 characters. And the X-Men, I think, fits the bill there a little bit better than the Fantastic Four. It could really go either way, but if I were to include the X-Men, the 4 characters I would use are Professor X, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Kitty Pryde. The latter 2, Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde, they would be the new recruits that Cyclone and Atom Smasher are said to be in the movie, while Wolverine is like the Hawkman and Professor X is the more elderly, probably much more experienced equivalent to Dr. Fate. But that's only if the X-Men are included. I do think the Fantastic Four fit here a bit better, but like they're including the JSA in a Black Adam movie where the JSA and Black Adam, like they have had connections in the past, but Black Adam is much more of a present-day Justice League superheroes villain like Shazam and Superman. So including the Fantastic Four, which is Doctor Doom's arch enemies, specifically Mr. Fantastic, while this movie doesn't include Shazam, I think that it makes more sense to include the slightly less connected X-Men, or actually much less connected X-Men, just because including the Fantastic Four would kind of be the equivalent to including Shazam, which he isn't in this movie. But honestly, it could go either way, the X-Men or the Fantastic Four. I just prefer to go with the X-Men for now, but if you want to, then you could go with the Fantastic Four. There are 4 heroes, so it definitely fits, and this is a Doctor Doom movie. So now we get to a big one, the Flash movie, which the equivalent is Doctor Strange, or you could call it Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. This is the reason that I made Doctor Strange the Flash counterpart, because the Flash movie, which is his first movie also, is going to be huge. It's going to be this huge universe-changing event where Barry goes to alternate universes or maybe alternate timelines. Much like Doctor Strange is going to be exploring the multiverse in this Multiverse of Madness movie. But this movie is what I've been talking about with Spider-Man this entire time. The Flash movie is rumored, but it's basically confirmed to be retconning Michael Keaton's Batman into the DCEU, replacing Ben Affleck's Batman with him, which is why in this movie it's going to be doing something similar with Spider-Man. Tom Holland has been the Spider-Man up until now, but then Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is in this movie. He had his own franchise a while back, but that was completely disconnected until now. And this movie changes the timeline, making Tom Holland's Spider-Man not exist anymore, and Tobey Maguire's 45, 47-year-old Spider-Man, the main Spider-Man in this universe. But also he's retired, he's not Spider-Man anymore, and he's replaced by Miles Morales, and we'll get to that in, I think, two or three movies, something like that. Also, Sam Wilson has a big role in this movie as the Falcon, but he becomes Captain America at the end, much like how Supergirl is basically replacing Superman as the main Kryptonian in the DCEU, which is also all but confirmed to be happening. Sam Wilson will be replacing Captain America as Captain America in this movie, and Steve Rogers is basically gone. He had one movie, he appeared also in Civil War and the Avengers, and then he was basically written off screen, replaced by somebody else. So then there's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, technically the first movie in this post-Flash timeline. That would be the Black Panther sequel, which in real life is Black Panther Wakanda Forever, so why not? We don't really know what Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom will be about, but this movie could just be whatever Black Panther Wakanda Forever will end up being, but also, I guess, also include T'Challa, because this movie does have Aquaman. Anyway, the movie after that is Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and the sequel to Captain Marvel is The Marvels, so just do that, including Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, and Photon, which the real The Marvels, which is actually coming out the same year that this movie is coming out as well, will be. So then we get the Batgirl movie, which is coming out on HBO Max. Now, what we know about this movie is that Michael Keaton will be the main Batman in this timeline now. It is the same universe, but now Ben Affleck is gone, and Michael Keaton, who's like 80 years old, will be the main and active Batman until he immediately retires and is replaced as like the main Bat of Gotham by Batgirl. This is really why I made Spider-Man the Batman equivalent after Civil War, because Iron Man isn't really much of a legacy character, and replacing Spider-Man with an older version of Spider-Man like Tobey Maguire works really well for Spider-Man, which it doesn't really work for any other character, and replacing Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man like immediately after that with a new version of Spider-Man, like the DCEU is replacing Batman with Batgirl, it works really well with this movie. This movie will be called The Ultimate Spider-Man, and Miles Morales' Spider-Man will be the main character. It could have done like a Spider-Girl character, but there isn't really a famous enough Spider-Girl legacy character who could like replace Spider-Man, while there is a very, very famous and now beloved version of Spider-Man who is now considered to be like the replacement to Peter Parker if Peter were to ever retire or die. This version of Peter Parker, like I said, is Tobey Maguire. He doesn't die, but he does retire, and he trains Miles as well. He mentors him, as Miles is the main character, and now the main Spider-Man of New York City. And the final movie in this video, and the final movie we know about as of right now for the DCEU, is Blue Beetle, which is coming out next year, and features the Jaime Reyes version of Blue Beetle as the main character. We also see that Ted Kord will be included, as the concept art does have Kord Industries in the background. So, I mean, this is an insect-based superhero who's taking over the mantle of a superhero role from a now or maybe even previously very rich superhero who is retired. Sounds a lot like Ant-Man, where Scott Lang is now taking over the role of an insect-based superhero from the now rich and retired Hank Pym, who was Ant-Man in the past. I think Ant-Man is the clear counterpart to Blue Beetle, even if he isn't nearly as cool. So that's it. That's the MCU, the Marvel Extended Universe, which is obviously a bit of a mess, but what did you expect? The DCU is a bit of a mess. Hopefully, maybe 2022 will turn that around, because this year is going to be huge for the DCEU. But the Flash movie kind of looks like it's going to ruin it and mess things up yet again. So that's it. That's the MCU. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. What would you change? What movies do you think I made the counterparts something that you would have done differently? And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like. Oh, also special thanks to my patron. Appreciate you a lot. And thanks for watching. Bye.